Hey there everybody, it's Mark Crowley. I'm back with another How to Draw video. Today we're going to be learning how to draw a dragon's head. It's been a while since I did a video on how to draw a dragon. I think almost all of the previous ones were black and white, or maybe even just very partially colored. This time I'm going to try to do full color. But to get started, let's begin with a few basic guidelines. I'm going to draw like a sideways V that will be the open mouth of the dragon. Alright, so you see it is kind of a modified V shape, curving upwards a little bit. And this is going to be the line of the upper lip, and this here the line of the lower lip. Notice that I've made this a little narrower from side to side. It's not quite as long a line. That's just the way I like the lower jaw to be just a little smaller than the upper beak area of the dragon. Now we're going to draw this line that sort of delineates the upper edge of the head. It's going to involve maybe 3 different basic guidelines. Let's just go ahead and get those into place. Alright, so maybe it's still a little bit difficult to see what we're doing here, but this, as I sort of described it, a little bit like a beak in a way, the shape of the dragon. And some people, when they draw dragons, they have a sort of bird-like quality to them. And then this is going to be the upper eyebrow almost, the sort of eye socket in this area. And in between them, I've put a pretty simple line, but we'll probably refine that this area into something a bit more complicated later on. Let's continue with the heading down to the lower jaw. I might just go ahead and do all of this in one continuous line. Alright, so as I said, I like to make the lower jaw a little smaller, just has a little less weight to it than the upper lip. Lip? Do dragons have lips? Let me know, folks. This upper area, upper jaw, I guess I should say. I'm going to just go ahead and do a line that sort of finishes off the lower jaw here. We're going to get some sort of sinuous material that holds the two, the upper and lower jaw together, and then I'll just draw the dragon tongue here in the middle. So there you see, pretty straightforward. In terms of the tongue of the dragon, you could make it much longer if you want to. Indeed, all of this you can modify it according to your own preferences. Now, we got to get into the details of the eyes, maybe the nostril up here, but I think first I better go ahead and draw 2 lines for the neck. Alright, now again, this comes down to personal preference. Some people like a thicker neck. In fact, I've seen a lot of dragon illustrations where the neck is almost just an extension, just keeps going straight, like the head of a snake almost. I like there to be a clear differentiation between the neck and the head. Let's go ahead now. I think we're almost done. I'll go ahead and just do the eyes and the nostril, and then the last thing we'll do will be the horns. Okay, so you can see I don't make the eye particularly large. Of course, you should feel free if you want to draw your dragon with a much larger eye than that. Both of these shapes kind of seed-like shapes. And as I said, I'm going to add these 2 lines for the horns, and then I think we can knock it off with all this time-lapse and get into some real-time drawing. Okay, so you can see I added just a little suggestion of the base of the horn, where the head, where the horn comes out of the head. I like to have them curving upwards, but you certainly could do a variation where the horns curve down. I've seen that done quite effectively. Now it's time to start refining. We've got these very basic guidelines. At the moment, it's time to start building on top of them. I like for there to be a little bit of a suggestion of a lip, if not an actual lip, on the dragon. And then, for this nostril, if you add a few extra lines on the exterior of that starts to help us imagine the structure there. Up here, I thought it might be kind of interesting if we had a couple of horns, almost decorative horns. Do they serve a purpose? Will these horns, maybe in battle, these horns could just add that little extra bit of damage. But to tell you the truth, a lot of the decisions that I make in a drawing like this are purely decorative, just because it looks right or it somehow balances things out. But this was a very sort of simple curved line. A lot of these things, as you go along, you might want to just sort of break up that line a little bit, try to add a little more visual interest. Certainly here in this area, I like the idea of taking this as I said, sort of the base of the horn, that the horn is growing out of the head, and then having that go straight into a sort of upper eyebrow structure that helps you suggest anger or intensity with the when we see an eye like this and we see some sort of rigid structure that comes across the top, it's just it communicates anger, I think, in a way. Now, a lot of people will draw dragons with these sort of snake eye type appearances. I'm not so crazy about that. I sort of like it better when it's just black, So that's probably what I'm going to do. And you got to get some bags under the eyes. These dragons, they don't get near enough sleep. It just helps visually, I think, I like to have at least 2 different layers of sort of bags. And you can see me beginning to get into the idea of adding details. I want to hold off on that maybe until a little longer, but later on in the video. But this section here I could see becoming a kind of a ridge, that adds more interest to this whole section here in what I was calling the beak earlier on. And as you go, you're going to break up these areas a lot with extra details and so forth. But for now, how about if we have this come down here and begin to, as I said, become this sort of base structure for the horn. And, I was saying how I like to have these horns curve upwards. Well, that doesn't mean that you can't have a secondary structure down here with horns that curve downward. No one can stop you from doing that if you want to. You are free to draw your dragon horns curving in any direction you choose. Don't let them push you around. This whole thing, again, for me becomes kind of decorative. I like to just have sort of fun with adding horns curving off in a variety of directions. For some reason, something's telling me to make this next one curve down. That doesn't mean they all have to curve down. In fact, why don't we add one down here that curves in the opposite direction? Some people, when they're drawing dragons, will really get into the horns and have a whole array of horns coming off of the this back area of the head, almost like a cascading series of them. I think I'm going to actually make this one a little smaller. That, again, is just sort of a aesthetic decision in terms of wanting there to be a variety of lengths. Now, I always like to take the neck area, the nectal region, and divide it into 2 sections. One that is sort of like what I once called snake belly skin. So I'm going to just draw sort of an organically loose line here, and then begin to add curving lines that to me make me think of the belly of a snake or of an alligator or something like that. And the curvature of these lines will help to define the structure of the neck. Now, you can't have a dragon without getting some of those good old-fashioned Godzilla spiny things coming off the top of the neck. I mean, can you? I don't think so. And so I'm going to come in here and start adding. And what I like to do with these is to really have them quite irregular, much as you see in the designs of Godzilla, that you might have these sort of V-shaped ones, and then there's like a double one here, and then the next one is small, and one after that comes up high, and you can just sort of have fun with adding variety, making it sort of unpredictable. There's no discernible pattern to it, you're just sort of going with the flow. And that may be getting us toward the end of that stuff. We don't want this to be a toothless. I'm not drawing toothless here. Maybe I should have drawn toothless, but I am going to add teeth to this dragon. And the thing I would say to pay attention to is the direction in which these teeth curve. I'm having them curve inward at this stage, and then for some reason I like it when you start getting back here that they're kind of curving in the opposite direction. So you reach a point where it's maybe straightens out and then begins to curve the other way. Does that make sense in terms of the teeth fitting together? Probably not. I'll be honest with you. But it looks cool. And that's all that matters to me. And I'm going to come down here, and my instinct is to make the teeth a little smaller on the lower jaw. So I'm going to keep these small, but much as I did with these sort of spiny structures back here, I don't like there to be too clean of a pattern. I like it to sort of have an organic, unpredictable variety to it. As part of what makes dragons look fierce, I think, is that they aren't so clean looking. There's this weird sort of patternless aspect to some of the horns and the teeth. And we're getting pretty near to all of the main structures. I am going to be adding a considerable amount of detail, but really what I want to do, because I said at the beginning that I am inclined to do this full color using watercolor, I'm not going to go too far into the details now because the watercolor could obliterate a lot of those details. But I am going to just do maybe as one final thing here, a suggestion of, as I said, a kind of lower lip area. And how about back here, if there's sort of a decorative secondary spine, not quite so prominent as this one, but maybe just a series of little bumps, you know. To me, that, again, just a visual thing that adds some interest to this section of the drawing. But right now I'm going to go ahead and grab my watercolors, and we're going to start adding a little bit of color to this dragon illustration. Now, I'm not going to be able to do this all real time, but I'll begin with just giving you a quick tip about how you can use a base layer of color that kind of goes all the way across your entire drawing, but it's not intended as the final color. It just sort of gives you something to build on. And indeed, I want to make this dragon rather more colorful than any of my previous videos. And so certainly not all of this is going to even show through. But it can be nice to sort of just get a base layer down. You can see I'm not being super careful. Far from it. Just sort of tossing down some color. And like, you know, I don't intend for the tongue to be this same ochre color, but I'm going to go ahead and put that in there anyway, just so as to unify the drawing, and little bits of this color will sort of peek through, you know, even in the final illustration. In fact, maybe instead of being so careful about avoiding the horns, I'll go ahead and just sweep them in to this base layer of color. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this up in time lapse. I'm going to let it dry, which is important, and then maybe I'll come back in and talk a little as I add further color to the illustration. Alright, so I've let that dry. You can see I had started to add a little bit of darker areas there, but I decided to stop and go in now with a little bit of red. We're going to make this a fairly bright red orange. Or bright red dragon. I'm not a huge fan of you know, neon bright colors, but I did think that to make this video different from its predecessors, let's go ahead and bring out the color and see what that does. Now, I've chosen to use watercolors, but if you don't have watercolors, you could do this with marker. You could apply this whole lesson to digital illustrations for sure. You know, a lot of these things that are done in using traditional drawing tools, the same principles apply when you're working digitally. But one reason that I like using watercolor is it has a natural tendency, at least the way I use it, to not provide a single unified color the way markers can, but it ends up sort of being a little blotchy and darker in some areas, lighter in other areas. Watercolor is famous for changing a little as it dries. The the color can sort of bunch up in certain areas and give you a crisp line in some other areas. So you can see me just kind of pushing it around and allowing it to be a little bit uneven and blotchy. One thing to be cautious about is not going too dark on this second layer. You know, with watercolors, there's a limit to how many layers you can put down. I'm going to try not to go very far past 3 layers of color. So you can see me going for a kind of mid-tone instead of a really dark, opaque red. He said, as suddenly the color got a lot darker. I'm having to kind of embrace some level of spontaneity here as I work along. Sometimes what you can do if you want to be a little more in control of what the final color is to use a separate piece of paper where you test the colors out every time before you go in for the final illustration. But you know, I'll be honest, in this case, this whole area just sort of came out a little darker than I wanted, but I think I can work with it, and I think sometimes that's the fun of watercolors, that you don't know exactly what you're going to get. There's a spontaneity, or a happy little accidents, as Bob Ross used to say. Especially with watercolor, I think you do get happy little accidents. There's something spontaneous about this material, that it takes on a life of its own, and it provides you with little bits of color that you didn't anticipate, and you just learn to work with what happens. You try to be a little free. Well, I've probably said enough about that in terms of this second layer. I'm going to go ahead and continue adding this in time-lapse, and then I'll come back and we'll maybe start to get into adding the real final details that will bring us toward the end of the illustration. Alright, so that's the watercolor phase. I'm not going to spend too much more time on this. I think this video is getting pretty long as it is, but I'm just going to say quickly that you know, if you want to add even further detail, you can try this technique that I often do of you know, doing the base watercolor and then going back in with colored pencils to tighten things up and add further detail. Of course, if you love watercolor and it looks finished to you, you can just stop at the watercolor stage. But one thing that's nice about colored pencils is the degree of control you can have, and so I want these horns to have a kind of gradual fade of color. That's pretty hard to achieve smoothly with watercolor, but super easy to achieve, as you can see me doing right now with colored pencil. And that's why I love to sort of combine the two. You get the looseness, the spontaneity of the watercolor, and then the tightness and control of the colored pencil. Let's go ahead and finish all this up in time-lapse. I might add a few little final touches with my beloved white gouache, but this is basically going to be it for the real-time drawing in this video. Let's go ahead and get it done. Alright, so you can see we're very nearly done here, and I'm kind of liking these bright colors. It certainly is different from what I usually do. I'm coming in with my beloved white gouache, which is very near the end of its lifespan here. I have ordered a replacement. It doesn't arrive for a while yet, though, so I have to keep getting use out of what remains here. I'm just going to do a quick little addition of highlights here. It can be surprisingly effective if you can add little white dots here and there. That suggest this glinting of light. It can make a big difference in terms of making the illustration look more three-dimensional, and that's why I keep bringing out that beloved white gouache. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this up in time-lapse, and then we'll be back with a few final words. Well, there you go. That's my video on how to draw a dragon's head, sort of combining, showing you how to draw the structure, and then also giving you some tips on how to add color to such an illustration. Before I go, though, I always want to say thank you to anyone who chooses to support me by getting any of my books, like the drawing lesson, my graphic novel that teaches you how to draw. Working on a sequel to this book. I'll be able to say more about that soon. The 2-pencil method, another one of my instructional art books, and Mastering Manga, a whole series of books, 1, 2, and 3, on how to draw in a manga style. Really can't say thank you enough to anyone who chooses to support me that way, but let's go ahead and lay down this pencil. I want to thank you all for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back with another one real soon.